The morning light spilled gently through lace curtains, casting soft patterns across the hardwood floors of a small but warm kitchen. Dr. Amara Field stood at the counter, still in her workout clothes, hair tied back, her accent humming through the air as she read aloud a passage from a book to her daughter. Layla sat at the table, a cereal bowl untouched, her legs folded beneath her, still in her basketball jersey from practice the night before. She wasn't listening to the words so much as the rhythm in her mother's voice, the kind of rhythm that held entire generations inside it. "See, language," Amara said, tapping her finger against the spine of the book. "It ain't just how we talk. It's how we survived. Every sound tells a story." She looked over, catching Layla's eyes with steady tenderness. "Don't you ever let nobody tell you your voice ain't enough." Layla smirked, finally breaking into laughter. "Mama, you always got a lecture for breakfast." Amara laughed too, a soft but sturdy sound that seemed to fill the little kitchen. It was the same laugh that used to echo through her grandmother's house, a laugh that carried strength even when the cupboards were empty. Now, years later, she carried it into her own home like armor. When she wasn't teaching at the university, Amara coached neighborhood kids at the worn-down gym on the east side of town. That evening, she pushed open the rusted metal doors and was met by the smell of sweat with polish and dreams that refused to die. The kids ran up to her, shouting her name, some tugging at her shirt, some shoving a basketball into her hands. She greeted them all with the same warmth. "All right, y'all," she called out, dribbling the ball and spinning in one hand. "Who's ready to play?" The kids hollered, their voices echoing through the cavernous space. She guided them through drills with patience, correcting posture, praising effort, and slipping in lessons about respect and persistence. To Amara, this was more than basketball. It was legacy. Her father had once been the brightest player this town had ever seen, a young black man with a jump shot that made recruiters whisper. But he never made it out. Doors closed. Opportunities disappeared. And then one night, a car accident that was never investigated. Amara never forgot. She carried his ghost with her into every classroom, every lecture, every moment she taught a child how to hold the ball right. It wasn't about winning. It was about never letting the system strip another young black kid of their chance to shine. Later that night, after practice, Amara and Layla sat in the back porch, the cicadas buzzing, the stars quiet overhead. Layla leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "You think I can make it out? College ball, maybe more?" Amara stroked her daughter's hair, her voice steady and low. "Baby, you can make anywhere. But you don't have to leave yourself behind to do it." Her words hung in the air, heavy and light all at once. It was a rare moment of peace in a town where peace for people like them was always fragile, always one sharp word or one cruel laugh away from being broken. For now, though, Amara let herself breathe. For now, her home was full of warmth, and her daughter's heartbeat was steady against her arm. She had no idea that within days, the same voice she had told her daughter to be proud would be mocked in front of the entire town. And nothing, not her degrees, her calm, her quiet strength, would protect her from what came next. The banquet hall glowed with polished chandeliers, casting a golden shimmer across linen-draped tables and polished silverware. Waiters moved with quiet precision, pouring wine into glasses that cost more than some families made in a week. It was the town's annual fundraising dinner for scholarships, an event that had become less about helping students and more about giving the wealthiest stage to congratulate themselves. Amara entered with Layla by her side, the two of them in modest dresses that Amara had carefully chosen. She knew how these events worked, the way eyes flicked from hemline to jewelry, silently measuring worth. Still, she carried herself with dignity, her head high, her accent unapologetically present as she greeted colleagues and community members. The room was thick with small talk and thinly veiled tension. The air smelled of roasted lamb and perfume that tried too hard. Layla leaned toward her mother. "Feels like we walked into one of those movies where they're all plotting something," she whispered, her nervous smile betraying her discomfort. Amara squeezed her hand gently. "Just remember, every table in here needs what we bring, even if they don't know it yet." At the center of the hall stood Victor Langford, the billionaire owner of the town's beloved minor league basketball team, the Hawks. His tailored suit gleamed like polished armor, and his laughter carried over the hum of conversation, commanding the room as if he owned not just the team, but the people in it. He had built his reputation on wealth and spectacle, but beneath the charm was a quiet cruelty that Amara had felt long before she ever met him. When Amara was called to the podium to speak, she adjusted the microphone, her voice steady but warm. She spoke about the power of education, the need for opportunity, the dignity in giving children a chance to rise. Her accent carried every word with rhythm that made some lean in closer, while others shifted in their seats. Scholarships, she said, glancing at Layla in the crowd, are not charity. They're a promise that every child, no matter where they come from, no matter how they sound, deserves to be seen as capable of greatness. A quiet murmur followed her words, the kind that meant some had been moved, while others resisted letting it show. She stepped down, offering a soft smile, ready to blend back into the background. But Victor couldn't let it pass. As the applause tapered off, he leaned toward the microphone, his smile sharp and theatrical. "Well," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, touching words indeed, though I'll admit I had a little trouble following through all that backwoods twang. Laughter rippled through the hall, low, nervous at first, then louder as people looked to Victor for cues. The sound spread like wildfire, filling the space, bouncing off the chandeliers. Some covered their mouths, others shifted uncomfortably, but most joined in. Layla's face went red, her eyes wide as she looked at her mother. Amara stood still, every muscle in her body tightening, yet her expression remained calm, unreadable. She didn't move, didn't flinch, though her daughter's shame burned in her chest like fire. Victor smirked, raising his glass as if he had delivered a harmless joke. "But hey," he added, "that's the beauty of America. Even accents got a seat at the table." The laughter swelled again, crueler this time. Amara drew a slow breath, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She met Victor's gaze across the room, steady and unbroken, and in that moment, the laughter felt smaller, thinner. She didn't rise to his bait, didn't snap back. She let the silence after the laughter belong to her, her composure more powerful than any retort. But Layla couldn't hide her hurt. She pulled her chair closer to her mother, her voice trembling in a whisper meant only for her. "Mama, why would they laugh like that?" Amara's hand found her daughter's under the table, squeezing gently. "Because, baby," she said softly, her voice calm though her heart was heavy, "sometimes people fear what reminds them of their own smallness." The night carried on, but the air had shifted. Whispers followed them as they moved, polite smiles hiding smirks. Cameras flashed, and though Amara left the hall with her head still high, the weight of humiliation lingered like smoke. Neither of them knew yet that the moment had been recorded, that Victor's words and the crowd's laughter would soon travel far beyond the chandeliered walls, into living rooms, headlines, and screens across the country. By the next morning, the video was everywhere. Someone had recorded Victor's smirk, his words dripping disdain, and the wave of laughter that followed. The clip spread fast, first through local gossip pages, then across social media, where hashtags and angry comments multiplied by the hour. Amara sat at her kitchen table, phone buzzing endlessly beside her coffee mug. She hadn't even pressed play. She didn't need to. Layla had, though. Her daughter's eyes were still red from crying, her shoulders hunched as she scrolled through the cruel jokes and taunts. "They keep making fun of how you talk," Layla whispered, her voice breaking. "Some of them saying you sound ignorant. Some saying I must sound the same." Amara reached for the phone and placed it face down on the table. "Baby, we don't measure ourselves by voices too small to carry truth." But the damage was done. By midday, the university sent a cautious email reminding Amara to uphold professional standards in all public appearances. Colleagues avoided her in the hall, their smiles tighter than usual, their conversations abruptly ending when she walked past. The same accent that had once been celebrated as her unique strength was now being painted as a weakness, a spectacle. At Layla's high school, the whispers were louder. In the locker room, girls who once admired her skill now mimicked her mother's speech with exaggerated drawls. When Layla snapped at one of them, the coach pulled her aside, his face stony. "We can't have you disrupting the team," he said, his tone rehearsed. "You're benched until further notice." "Benched?" Layla's voice cracked. "For what? Standing up for my mama?" "It's not about that," he muttered, refusing to meet her eyes. "It's about keeping peace." She stormed out of the gym, sneakers squeaking against the polished floor, humiliation clinging to her like a second skin. That evening, she sat silent at the dinner table, pushing food around her plate. Amara studied her, every movement of her daughter's fork, the way she wouldn't lift her head. Finally, Layla whispered, "Feels like they're trying to erase us, like they want us invisible unless we're winning games for them." Amara's chest tightened. The words were too familiar, too much like her father's old confessions when the world had broken his spirit. She placed her hand gently over Layla's. "That's the trick they use, baby. Make you believe your worth only counts when it serves them. But we know better." Outside, the night pressed against the windows, heavy and thick. The quiet hum of the town carried the sound of televisions blaring the same clip on repeat. Voices debating whether it was harmless or hateful, whether Amara was too sensitive or an inspiration. Everyone had an opinion. No one asked her. Later, as she prepared for bed, Amara caught a reflection in the mirror. She studied her face, the lines of exhaustion near her eyes, the faint smile lines carved by years of choosing joy in spite of everything. She whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, "They can laugh, but I won't bend." Still, when she lay down beside Layla, listening to her daughter's restless tossing in the next room, she knew the fight was only beginning, because this wasn't just about a billionaire mocking her accent anymore. It was about a town, a system, a history that wanted them silent. And silence was the one thing Amara Fields could never allow. The university's library was nearly empty that evening, the tall windows casting long shadows over rows of books. Amara sat at one of the oak tables, a stack of papers in front of her, her laptop glowing faintly. She had buried herself in work, the familiar comfort of research, trying to steady her mind. But every time her phone buzzed with another notification, her thoughts drifted back to the laughter, the looks, her daughter's tear-stained face. She closed her laptop and pulled out a worn leather folder, one she hadn't touched in years. Inside were old testimonies, court transcripts, letters, evidence of a life she had once lived at the margins of public attention. People in town knew her as a professor, a mother, a coach. Few knew the battles she had fought outside these walls. She flipped to a letter on embossed stationery. It was from a civil rights attorney in Washington, thanking her for her expert testimony in a landmark case about linguistic discrimination. She remembered the courtroom, the way the opposing counsel tried to belittle her credentials, suggesting that studying accents was hardly a real science. And she remembered the silence that fell when she explained in calm, measured tones how entire communities were denied jobs, housing, and dignity because of the way they spoke. The case had been won. Lives had been changed. Her mind wandered further back, to the long nights spent helping her grandmother fill out forms she couldn't read, documents that seemed designed to confuse. Amara had promised herself, then and there, that she would master the language that tried to box them in, that she would use it to open doors for others. She rose from the table and walked to the tall window. The town stretched out beneath her, quiet, the stadium lights from the Hawks arena glowing faintly in the distance. That building, that team, it had once represented possibility to her father, and then betrayal when the gates stayed closed. Now it was owned by a man who saw voices like theirs as punchlines. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from one of her former students, now a successful entrepreneur in Chicago. The message was simple. Saw the video. "Whatever you need, I've got your back." Another message followed, then another. Students she had mentored, colleagues she had advised, even a former athlete she once tutored, voices from across the country reaching out. She sank back into her chair, overwhelmed for a moment, her hands trembling. For years she had poured herself quietly into others, never asking for anything in return. And now, without her even asking, they were rallying. The door to the library creaked open, and Layla stepped in, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. "Mama," she whispered, walking over, "what are you doing here so late?" Amara smiled faintly, sliding the folder closed. Just reminded myself who I am. Layla frowned. I know who you are. You're my mama, and you're stronger than all of them. Amara's throat tightened. She pulled her daughter close, resting her chin on her hair. One day, you'll understand. Every time they try to make us small, it's just a chance to show them how big we've been all along. As they sat there in the quiet, Amara felt something shift. She was no longer the woman trying to endure humiliation in silence. She was a scholar whose words had once reshaped laws. She was the daughter of a man whose dream had been stolen, but whose legacy burned in her chest. She was the mother of a girl who deserved to see the world bow to her voice, not laugh at it. And if Victor Langford thought he had mocked her into silence, he had no idea what storm he had just awakened. By the end of the week, the clip of Victor's insult had become more than just gossip. It had grown into a national conversation. News anchors replayed it with solemn expressions. Journalists wrote columns dissecting the racism beneath the laughter, and hashtags calling for Victor's resignation trended across social media. But the attention was a double-edged sword. On one hand, support poured in. Amara's email inbox overflowed with messages from strangers, Black families who thanked her for standing tall, teachers who shared stories of students mocked for their accents, even international scholars citing her work as validation. Alumni she hadn't spoken to in years offered resources, connections, money. Former players from the Hawks reached out, some publicly, some in whispered phone calls at night. They told her what everyone in town already knew, but never dared say aloud. Victor had built his empire on exploitation. Contracts with hidden clauses, salaries lower than industry standards, threats against anyone who spoke out. Now, at last, cracks were showing. But for every message of support, there was venom too. Anonymous phone calls in the dead of night. Letters slipped into her mailbox with slurs scrawled in jagged handwriting. One morning, as she walked Layla to school, a truck slowed near the curb. A man leaned out the window and spat, "Go back to the fields, lady." Then he laughed, revving his engine before speeding off. Layla's face paled, but Mara gripped her hand tighter, never breaking stride. At the university, colleagues avoided eye contact, whispering in corners. The administration called her in for a discussion, their tone clipped and nervous. "Dr. Fields," the dean said, folding his hands across his desk, "we value your scholarship, of course, but this media attention is becoming disruptive. Perhaps it would be wise to let this pass quietly." Amara sat still, her back straight, her voice calm. "If silence had saved us, Dean, we would have been free a long time ago." That night, she returned home to find Layla scrolling through her phone again, her hand shaking. "Mama," she said, "they're saying it's your fault, that you brought it on yourself." Amara knelt down in front of her, cupping her daughter's face gently. "Listen to me. When people see you refuse to bow, they get scared. And scared people always try to blame the ones who make them face themselves." The next day, Amara agreed to an interview with a national news outlet. Cameras filled her living room, lights flooding the modest space. She sat on her worn couch, Layla watching from the doorway, and spoke with steady conviction. "My accent is not ignorance. It is history. It is the sound of my grandmother praying over me at night, of my father teaching me how to dribble a ball in the driveway, of a community that refuses to disappear. When you mock a voice, you mock a people, and we will not let that stand." The segment aired across the country. Clips of her words circulated online, set to music, shared like gospel. Students at the university staged a silent protest on the quad, holding signs that read, "Our voices matter." Churches rang bells. Activists rallied. But as her voice spread, so did the danger. Late one evening, as she left the gym after coaching the kids, she noticed a patrol car parked just across the street. Headlights pointed at her, engine idling. It didn't move as she got into her car. It didn't move as she drove away. It just followed, slow and deliberate, until she turned into her driveway and the red taillights finally disappeared into the night. She stood in the doorway, heart pounding, watching Layla sleep peacefully inside. For the first time in years, fear pressed heavy against her ribs. Not fear for herself. She had lived with that all her life. But fear for her daughter, for the children she coached, for a community that had begun to believe in her. She exhaled slowly, her voice steady even in the quiet. "If they think this will break us," she whispered into the dark, "then they don't know how strong we are." The living room became a war room. On a rainy Saturday afternoon, Amara spread folders across the coffee table. Contracts, emails, reports, even screenshots of text players had forwarded her. The blinds were drawn, the hum of the storm outside muffling the weight of what was unfolding inside. Across from her sat Marcus Bell, a former student who had once struggled through her linguistics class. His speech peppered with stutters he thought made him small. With Amara's encouragement, he had fought through law school, and now, years later, he was a civil rights attorney with fire in his eyes. He leaned forward, scanning a document with clenched fists. "They've been cooking the books," he muttered. "Lowballing contracts, forcing players into signing extensions they can't get out of. It's not just unethical, it's criminal." Beside him sat Renee Alvarez, another of Amara's old students, now a journalist with a R, reputation for digging into corruption. She tapped her pen against her notebook, eyes sharp. "If even half of this holds up, we can burn Victor's empire down in print." Amara sat quietly, listening, her fingers folded in her lap. She wasn't a lawyer or an investigative reporter. She was a teacher, a mother, but as she looked at the two of them, students she had once nurtured, now grown into weapons of justice, she realized her reach was deeper than Victor could have ever imagined. "Don't just burn him," she said softly. "Expose the soil he planted in, the system that watered him." Marcus looked up. "You're talking bigger than Victor." Amara's eyes were steady. "Because it is bigger. He's just the face of what they all think they can get away with." Over the next weeks, the plan unfolded with quiet precision. Marcus filed formal complaints with the Players Association, attaching evidence of discriminatory practices. Renee began publishing a series of articles, each one more damning than the last, connecting Victor's business dealings to backroom deals with city officials. Anonymous sources spoke to her on record. Former employees, athletes whose careers had been sabotaged, staff members who described a culture of fear. Amara, meanwhile, worked the phones. Every evening after teaching and coaching, she sat at her kitchen table with a list of numbers. Venture capitalists, alumni, former students who had built companies of their own. She spoke with a calm authority, her accent carrying through the line, unapologetic. "We need to create a fund," she explained. A fund not just to challenge Victor, but to buy him out. At first, the idea sounded impossible. But money has a way of moving when conscience is stirred, and little by little, pledges came in. One investor promised $1 million. Another offered stock. A coalition was forming, piece by piece, bound by loyalty to Amara and the justice of her cause. But with every move, the pushback grew harsher. Anonymous threats escalated. Police cruisers parked across the street more frequently now, their presence a silent warning. One night, after another community meeting, Amara returned home to find her front door spray painted with a single word: mute. She stood there in the cold night, Layla clutching her arm, neighbors gathering in hushed concern. Amara didn't touch the paint. She didn't let her voice shake. "Tomorrow morning," she told her daughter, "we'll paint over together with a brighter color." The next day, they did. Layla chose yellow. Neighbors brought brushes. The word disappeared beneath broad strokes of light. Inside the house, the evidence piled higher. The fund grew larger, and Amara's resolve hardened. She wasn't just defending her dignity anymore. She was building a weapon powerful enough to dismantle Victor's grip on the town. And somewhere deep down, she knew this was no longer about whether she could stand against him. It was about when and where the fight would break open for everyone to see. The town hall was packed to walls, air thick with sweat, perfume, and tension that buzzed like static. Cameras lined the back, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes. On one side sat Victor Langford, flanked by lawyers in crisp suits, their briefcases polished, their expressions smug. On the other side, Amara Field sat quietly, her daughter beside her, Marcus and Renee standing just behind. She looked calm, hands folded, chin lifted, but her heart thudded against her ribs in a rhythm that reminded her of her father's old jump shot, steady, unshaken, precise. The mayor called the meeting to order, voice trembling slightly beneath the weight of the crowd. "We're here to address the concerns raised regarding the Hawks' management and ownership." His words were meant to sound neutral, but his eyes kept darting toward Victor, like a man afraid of biting the hand that fed him. Victor rose first, smooth and deliberate, his presence commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming, "this circus has gone on long enough. I have given this town jobs, pride, and a team to cheer for. And now, because I dare make a harmless joke, I'm being dragged to the mud by—" He glanced at Amara, lips curling, a professor with a chip on her shoulder. A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the audience. Victor smirked, confident, the same smirk from that dinner. Then Amara stood. She didn't rush, didn't raise her voice. She simply walked to the podium, papers in hand, her daughter's gaze steady on her back. When she spoke, her accent carried clearly, unashamed, filling the room with rhythm that cut through the silence. "You call it harmless," she said, her eyes locking on Victor's. "But we know better, because what you mocked wasn't just me. It was my grandmother's prayers, my father's dreams, my daughter's future. You mocked the people who've carried this town on their backs long, before your money came here." She laid the first document on the podium, her hand steady. "These are contracts showing how you underpaid your black players while profiting from their image. Another stack, emails between you and city officials, fixing deals that drained our community and lined your pockets." Then she turned slightly, nodding to Marcus, who stepped forward with another folder. "And this? Signed agreements from your own shareholders. They've sold their stakes to us." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in. Victor's confident mask slipped. Amara's voice rose just slightly, not with anger, but with unshakable truth. "You no longer own the Hawks, Mr. Langford. The team belongs to a new coalition, made of the very people you thought would stay silent. And as of tonight, I'm the majority owner." The room erupted. Some cheered, some shouted. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing. Victor slammed a fist on the table, his lawyers whispering frantically, but the tide had shifted. He was no longer in control. Amara leaned forward, her final words cutting clean through the chaos. "This accent you mocked? It just bought your empire, and it will speak louder than your money ever did." Victor's face twisted, rage contorting features that had once commanded obedience. But no one was laughing with him now. Amara stepped back from the podium, her daughter's hand slipping into hers, warm and strong. The crowd's noise swelled behind her, but all she heard was the steady beat of her own heart, unbroken, unbowed. Weeks later, the town felt different. The stadium that once carried Victor Langford's name now bore a new banner. The Hawks, a team for people. The colors were the same, but the atmosphere had shifted. Kids who used to watch from cracked sidewalks now filled the bleachers on scholarship nights, their laughter echoing under the lights. Local vendors ran stands inside the arena, their businesses finally part of the economy they had always fueled from the outside. For the first time, the team felt like it belonged to the town, not to a man. On opening night of the new season, Amara stood just inside the tunnel, watching players warm up. Layla was beside her, dressed in her high school jersey, her eyes wide with a mix of pride and possibility. The crowd roared as the announcer introduced the team's new leadership, a board made up of community leaders, former players, and educators. When Amara's name was called as majority owner, the sound that rose from the stands was deafening. Not polite applause, not nervous chuckles. A roar of respect, born from recognition. She stepped out onto the court. The hardwood gleamed beneath her feet, polished to perfection. For a moment, she thought of her father, how his dreams had died before reaching this floor, how his voice had been dismissed. She pictured him sitting in the stands, head held high, that same steady rhythm in his chest. A lump formed in her throat, but she held steady. This was his victory, too. After the ceremony, Amara walked outside to community court near the old gym. The sun was setting, streaks of orange and violet stretching across the sky. Kids were already playing, shirts untucked, sneakers worn down, the ball thudding against cracked pavement. She called out to them, her voice carrying across the court. "Y'all mind if I take a shot?" The kids laughed, passing her the ball. She dribbled once, twice, then sank a clean jumper. Cheers erupted, Layla clapping the loudest. The ball rolled back to her feet, and she passed it to her daughter, who dribbled in rhythm before shooting her own. The ball sailed through the net, smooth as breath. Amara wrapped her arm around Layla's shoulders, both of them watching the younger kid scramble for rebounds. The sounds of sneakers squeaking, children laughing, the ball bouncing. It was a symphony more powerful than any speech. "Mama," Layla said softly, "you really did it." Amara looked out at the court, her voice steady. "We did it. And don't forget, baby, our voices, no matter how they sound, were never meant to be silenced." The camera of the moment lingered there, the mother and daughter framed against a sky that held both the memory of struggle and the promise of change. The laughter of children carried into the night, blending with the steady hum of a town learning, at last, what justice could look like. For Amara, it wasn't about owning a team. It was about reclaiming something that had always been theirs. Dignity, legacy, the power of a voice that refused to bend.